Yo, so I just want to give a quick little tip for other authors out there, especially authors that struggle with dialogue. So with that being said, as a beta reader myself, I always got to read other people's works of literature, and I love it. It's a fantastic thing to do. So when you're typing these reports out, when I'm typing reports out, I'm looking for a lot of different specific things. I'll just go over one here so I can start doing like multiple of these videos. But anyways, dialogue. You want dialogue that is rich, and you want to have rich dialogue tags at the end of your things, at the end of your speeches. So with that being said, one thing that you definitely want to avoid is ping-pong dialogue, especially in fiction, especially in literature, because ping-pong dialogue would be like, yo, what's up? How you doing? Good. Great for you. Awesome. How's your day? Good. You want to avoid stuff like that. You want to avoid these. You want to have thicker chunks. You know what I mean? How are you doing? I had a great day today. I saw somebody else at the store today and it was fantastic. You know, you want to go into 12 detail as opposed to, you know, like it's like spraying dialogue to people. There's a little tip. You'll love it. So authors and everybody else, how do we create great characters, enticing characters that we love and will never ever forget? Well, it's very simple, okay? This is the advice that I give other people, okay? We're gonna use, as a psychology major, use the Myers-Briggs test. That's a great way to like kind of bring characters out, as well as the Carl Jung Jungian archetypes that exist in the subconscious. So with that being said, if I were you as an author, a brand new author especially, print out the Myers-Briggs test, print out the Jungian archetypes, learn a little bit about psychology, because the characters in your novel are most likely going to be human. So with that being said, or at least humanistic traits. So with that being said, you master character creation through these psychological concepts. Now it goes a lot deeper into that, but with that being said, I'm just going to focus on psychology just for this video. With that being said, yeah, really focus on just how the mind works. You know, INTP, ENTP, ENFJ, you got to realize these things and you got to put them into the character's life, because that. Okay, so I'm gonna go over something that's near and dear to my heart. It's plot structure. We love plot structure around here. We want proper plot structure. We want proper plot structure. So with that being said, you gotta focus up here, people. With that being said, we gotta move into an area. We gotta move into a paradigm where we're constructing plots with purpose. Okay. So with that being said, a lot of authors don't necessarily do it like this, where they kind of chart out everything. I do that, but at the same time, you don't need to do that. But at the same time, there are intuitive things that just are intuitive. You should know a proper plot structure should have an exposition, an introduction, rising action, a climax, usually a final resistance right before the climax, a falling action, as well as a resolution. So these things need to be present in order for at least a plot to make sense, you know, for the character, because if it's all over the place, it's like figuring out a jigsaw puzzle that we don't want to fix, you know what I mean? We don't want to figure that out. We want to, it's got to be at least, it's got to be purposeful. You got to have purposeful plot structure. You can't be random, because that drives people nuts. So now that we know about a little bit of plot structure, how we're going to do it with purpose, people, we got to understand how these different plot points like are synonymous with their specific tasks. So with that being said, exposition. We want to use the exposition to set up the aesthetic as well as contribute to the theme of the story. That is a very important part of the aesthetic. It's like the opening vista in a movie. Like that's what we want to set up for the character. Then we go into the character introductions as well as like just the introduction of the setting, theme, and all that. But at the same time, we do need an inciting incident. Now, the inciting incident is what kicks off the story. Like, let's look at Harry Potter. You know, Harry Potter, he's a kid, he lives on the stairs. And then Hagrid, the big guy, he comes out of nowhere and he takes him. That's an inciting incident. So utilize inciting incidents to start your plot. Okay, I'll go more into rising action, but at the time, exposition, you know, establish your characters and then give them something to do. Don't just throw them off a cliff. You know what I mean? That drives me crazy. So one of the biggest tips I could give other authors is from a neurological perspective. You want readers to enter what's called an alpha state of mind, where they're just barely, you know, they're just kind of like barely alert, but at the same time they're delving with their imagination into the book. And this is what we need to do when the reader is in that state. We need to provide them with sensory detail. And that's the number one thing I can give advice for other authors out there. You try to write with sensory detail. We're talking about, you know, smelling, hearing. You want to tasting even. You want to bring these out for the reader, because the mind, subconscious mind, cannot differentiate between reality and imagination at times, believe it or not, especially during these alpha states. And that's how hypnosis works. So that being said, I'm not saying hypnotize the readers, but add sensory detail so when they're in this alpha state, they can really soak it in and get reinterested in the content that is in the book. So with that being said, sensory detail, people, sensory detail. So now that we're done talking about sensory detail, we can talk about another thing that's so important to writers: setting. You need to fix your settings, okay? With that being said, here's how the mind learns. The mind learns by association. So what you want to do is add familiarity in your settings. Now, how do we do this in fiction when we have these far out worlds that don't make sense to the average mind? You still associate. So like, let's say there's volcanoes all over, you know, the planet. You know, you want to make sure that we associate this with something we already know. But how can we do that if Hawaii is not in there? We gotta maybe go refer to mountainous range, you know, a heated mountainous range. We could do something like that. Also at the same time, when you're describing planets that are maybe like toxic, just anything out there that's far out the box in fiction, you want to find ways to associate that. And usually, oftentimes or not, this is not too hard, but try not to just leave everything ambiguous is definitely the point I'm saying here. So yeah, familiarity is key. Yeah, so this next tip has to do with science fiction. We love science fiction, people. Crazy laser beams, all that, we love it. But with that being said, authors, when I get books about science fiction, I gotta read the whole thing. It's fun. But at the same time, the biggest mistake that I see people making, especially science fiction authors, they assume that the reader knows what they're talking about. And that's definitely one of the biggest things that I kind of like really gotta remind the author over and over and over again. It's like, dude, as soon as you reach a certain point, maybe 2 chapters down, you're gonna have to reiterate. You're gonna have to re-explain a lot of these concepts, these foreign concepts for the author, for the reader, because they're not gonna understand what's going on. They're gonna forget. The human mind is feeble. Forgets. So you gotta focus up and associate. At the same time, taking these foreign concepts and making them like familiar is a masterful thing to do. And the way to do it is constantly reiterating, constantly like refurbishing this world for the reader, so they're not just like lost. You know what I mean? Like, so even though it is a foreign world, you want to make people, you know, feel good. You want to make people feel familiar there. Love it. So when I get horror fiction, I got a lot of different types of tips. It's not necessarily my favorite genre, but reading so much of it, I've definitely learned a lot. And my biggest piece of advice actually comes from Stephen King. He says, write characters you love and then put them in the worst situations possible. And with that being said, yeah, definitely. You want to have a consistent theme throughout this horror fiction you're making. Like, think of Lovecraft, where he has this consistent fluctuation of like really gruesome like adjectives, like he's really throwing like it all into one big pot. So with that being said, when you're writing horror fiction, you definitely want to make sure you're putting your situations very bad. Like, don't go from like okay horror into like really bad horror. Like, really stretch it out, but don't get too exaggerated. But like, let's say your person's gonna get shot, make it so he gets shot in the leg, and then shot in the knee. Make him get shot 1,000,000 times, stabbed, make him get brutally stabbed 100 times, as opposed to maybe once or twice. You really want to make it bleed. You really want to torture these characters. I love that in fiction.